How's it going, everybody? It's Prod here and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be trying something a little bit different. I want to do some rankings because the Elden Ring DLC trailer obviously dropped not too long ago and I'm still hyped up for it. I think everybody's still very excited for it. We need to keep this hype for 4 months, so maybe we're going to have to regulate that hype a little bit. But luckily there's tons of stuff coming out soon that's going to be freaking awesome to play. Final Fantasy, Dragon's Dogma 2. I still need to finish Baldur's Gate, Rise of Ronin. Like, there's tons of things in between. So luckily the DLC is coming out in 4 months because there's a lot of stuff to do. But what I wanted to do today is look back on the past of From Software, and mainly the Souls-Borne Ring series of games, because From Software have a particular skill and somehow always manage to have some of the best bosses, some of the best areas in their DLCs. I typically think DLCs for the From Software games are some of the best content we ever get for the entire lifetime of the game. So while I'm extremely hyped up for Shadow of the Erdtree, and I think it'll kind of follow along the trends, I think we still have some of the best bosses coming up. I'm gonna look back at their series. Now, while I am ranking them from best to worst in my own personal opinion, I'm gonna start off in order of release date and then pop them on the list. So who knows, maybe it's gonna start off with number 1. I guess we'll find out here. So let's go ahead and start off with Demon Souls. Okay, maybe not that one. Maybe the next one. Artorias of the Abyss. Now, I was not playing Dark Souls at the time of the release of this. I had not gotten into the series yet. I came in a little bit late, so I may not have the perspective as some others might with the hype that was leading up into the DLC. You're getting a perspective of somebody who's played this DLC and a lot of these DLCs, probably about a dozen times each, both in their regular form and Soul Level 1, over-leveled with different mods, and Artorias of the Abyss is constantly one of my favorites. I still think that it carries the spirit of Dark Souls, but improves upon it by giving you some of the coolest bosses, some of the most memorable moments. For example, seeing Goth shoot down Calamite is still one of my favorite things. I always do it in every single playthrough that I do of the DLCs. I always try my best to go in there and go up to Goth, and it's freaking badass. And as the name states, Artorias of the Abyss, you know, we heard a lot about Artorias throughout the game, about him being a hero of the main story, and then you go into the DLC to see how he was corrupted in the DLC. It's kind of a tragic hero story, and you obviously start seeing some hints of, you know what I mean. Just a couple hints of Berserk in there with Artorias' story. And this was the first DLC where they actually did something special that I hope that we get for the Elden Ring DLC, in that not necessarily it has to be an ending, but I hope we get moments that happen in the DLC that affect the main game. Either have it be a new playthrough, an old playthrough, you go back and try to finish some quests, maybe it cuts back to a character. It doesn't have to be big. For example, the most memorable moments for all the DLCs, in my opinion, for me, is still whenever you go into the DLC and you save Sif in the little bubble, little baby Sif that Artorias sacrifices his life for, essentially, to save Sif. Whenever you save Sif and then go back into the main game post DLC, having killed the final boss, Sif recognizes you and kind of lets out a little cry, almost in sadness of having to kill you. I think that moment is freaking heartbreaking. It's one of the coolest little moments that happens if you play Artorias of the Abyss first before the main game. And while it doesn't happen a ton, it does happen a few times, and I hope we get some of that in Shadow of the Erdtree, because we have so many unfinished stories, in my opinion. I want to see Tanith turn into one of those baby snakes that's on Mesmer's shoulder. You know what? Crazy idea, I know. She ate that big ass Rykard, alright? Let's see what happens to her. But that is why I am popping Artorias of the Abyss. Now, might be kind of controversial, at number 4 on my list of 7. On to Dark Souls 2 that has 3 freaking DLCs. This was a chunky one. They added tons of content post the game's release. And in my opinion, it has a few very high moments and a few very low moments. We're going to start off with the very first DLC. Obviously, the objective of all the DLCs is to go back in time and claim the crowns to have a new ending for the main game. I do absolutely love the ending that all the DLCs for this game provide for Dark Souls 2. So the idea in general to collect something that you take back to the main game is super awesome, but we're going to focus on the DLC itself. Crown of the Sunken King, in my opinion, is a great place to start because this one is always a slog for me. This one's always kind of a pain to go through and actually end up doing it. I am not a big fan of, not overall the color palette that you have. It's always kind of green and kind of gray, even though you could say that about a lot of areas in Dark Souls 2, but there's some areas that pull it off really well. While I do think that the Sunken King has a couple of really cool moments, for example, I think it is one of the better ones when it comes to the exploration. I think that it has a lot of fun, different mechanics that make exploration entertaining and doesn't feel too boring. It always kind of feels like there's stuff hidden, you'll feel like you miss stuff a lot. And while I do think it has its memorable moments, like your first time encountering Sin kind of reminds me of Dark Souls 1 when Calamite landed on the bridge and then flew off. It always reminds me of that. Seeing him shoot the fireballs into the enemies, maybe thinking he's even friendly. But overall, I just don't like the bosses in this DLC. Ilana is kind of okay. I don't think she's too terrible of a boss fight herself. The gank squad boss fight is terrible. The run up to the gank squad is horrific as well. Sin can be kind of hit or miss. He has some of the most broken, annoying hitboxes in all of Dark Souls 2. And while he has some cool moves, in general, he's just kind of like a dragon. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing too special about him. Like, sure, he's a poison dragon. There's a giant, like, arrow sticking out of his chest, which looks cool. But he is very simplistic. You'll see moving forward in Dark Souls 2, they definitely got way better. But overall, I would rank Crown of the Sunken King number 7. Crown of the Old Iron King. Now, I don't know where this DLC came out of, because they had all these misses with Crown of the Sunken King, and then they go, boom, we have Crown of the Iron King, and it has some of the freaking best bosses in the entire series, some of the coolest areas and map designs. But let me tell you, man, they were cooking on the Old Iron King DLC. It has, again, Fume Knight, which is one of my favorite bosses, and I think for a lot of people, one of the most memorable bosses. This to me was almost like the challenge boss of the DLC. A lot of people ended up going and doing some crazy wild stuff. You know, New Game Plus 7, no rolling, no dodging, broken weapon, no hands. And you have Sir Alon, who is also one of the coolest bosses. Always one of the most memorable boss rooms for me. And it's not like this DLC doesn't come with any drawbacks. Of course, you have Blue Smelter Demon, which is a cool boss in general, but overall it's just kind of like a blue version of the regular Smelter Demon. And don't even get me started on that run to the boss fight. Recently did it at Soul Level 1, and it was the worst thing I've done so far. But overall, very memorable experience, memorable bosses, really cool areas to explore. That's why I put that at number 3. Now, this DLC for me is very hit or miss. Can one boss really carry like an entire DLC? And for this one, it's almost. It has a couple of great weapons that you find throughout the DLC. I like the icy area. The environment is really cool. The bosses that you fight within it kind of fit the environment, with it being all icy and cold. That being multiple giant tigers, which in general is cool, but you kind of just fight multiple of those and then the main boss. Now, I freaking love the Burnt Ivory King. He's almost always one that I like doing at the end because for some reason he feels like a finale type of boss to me. Which they did do an amazing job. I love the quest of having to go grab all the little guys, even though it can be kind of a pain in the ass to grab a few of them. I like getting to the end where we all fight together with these sort of like puppeted armors and eventually take on the Burnt Ivory King. Cool movesets, looks freaking cool, and his entrance is still one of the best in the entire series. Is that him? Are those horns? Go near the door, I ain't doing shit, dog. Is that him? Burnt Ivory King, huh? But overall, the DLC is just kind of average, in my opinion. Random enemy placements that sometimes are kind of annoying, and quite literally, maybe the worst area in the entire Souls-Borne Ekido Ring series, which has at this point in the community been named Horsefuck Valley, because you're constantly being fucked by non-stop horses every time you kill them about every 10 seconds, and it could just be a pain in the ass because you're doing the entire thing completely blind because there's so much snow you can't see 2 feet in front of you. I'm gonna be having to go through that until level 1 soon. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not gonna enjoy it very much. But that is why I rank Crown of the Ivory King at number 6. And here we are to the Old Hunters DLC for Bloodborne. What I think is still one of the most standout DLCs in their lineup, and sort of where I learned that some of the best bosses tend to be after the regular main game's content. This DLC is just an absolute banger, from boss to boss to boss. Like almost every single boss is memorable in this DLC. Has some of the coolest weapons to get in the entire game. My personal favorite weapon is in it as well, being the Whirly Jigsaw, whatever you like to call it. Some of the best music, in my opinion, for the entire series. You got Ludwig, Orphan of Cause, Lady Maria. This DLC is just freaking incredible and should be like the golden standard for From Software DLCs. Even to this day, some of those bosses still stand out as some of the best in the entire series, so it's no surprise that this is going to be really high up on my list, putting it at number 2. Now on to the first DLC of Dark Souls 3, Ashes of Ariandel. Now this is also kind of like a toss-up for me. Sometimes it can be fun to go through, sometimes it can be kind of a slog. While I think that the next DLC, and we'll talk about that here in a moment, did get way better, Ashes of Ariandel on its own does still stand as an okay DLC. I think that the barren ice wasteland can be a little bit boring. The massive amount of wolves that there are in the DLC, even though you do get to fight a giant one who kind of looks like a crackhead version of Sif. But it does get big bonus points for introducing the arena into Dark Souls 3. That's kind of like where I started making a lot of PvP videos. A lot of people probably started playing PvP at that time and really getting into the arena scene. And it was so much fun. I think it does get big ups for that reason. And while I don't think that the wolf mixed with the little fella boss is really all that good, I think sometimes it can be a little bit boring. You have probably one of the best bosses in any DLC from the Soul series, and that is Sister Frida, the crazy 3-phased boss that everybody always mentions. For sure, one of my all-time favorites. I think she's just like a better version of Lady Maria from Bloodborne, and a lot of people might see it the other way, saying that she's just an inferior version of Maria. Maybe you can tell me where you land on that side of the coin, but she kind of carries this DLC almost on her own, because if it wasn't for her being in there, I feel like the DLC would just not be that fun. While I still think it's okay and it's better than some of the other ones that we've seen today, I do think that it doesn't really compare to some of the better ones like the Old Hunters or Artorias of the Abyss, so that is why I put it right in the middle at number 5. And here we are at the Ringed City, the end of it all, quite literally, when it comes to this DLC, where it squishes all the different timelines together to make a just monstrosity destroyed world. The NPCs that you run into, the storylines with Lap and Patches, are some of my most memorable, and some of the ones that I still think about every single time I go into the Ring City DLC. I always have a good time. Not only that, but in my opinion, I still think that the height of this DLC is untouched by even the old Hunters, which I think comes the closest when it comes to the boss fights, the big major boss fights. So in old Hunters you have like Orphan of Cause, you have Ludwig, but in this game you have Gale and Midir. Like, it's so hard to really compare them because they are very different bosses, but in my opinion, I think the top big boy bosses in the Ring City far outclass basically every single DLC that we've mentioned today. When you have a dragon that is essentially like almost a smaller, angry version of Godzilla, I feel like that's going to be pretty memorable for most people. Gale's OST still freaking hits hard. While I would probably say that, in my opinion, the world of the old Hunters, and I still think is probably better than the Ring City. I think that when it comes to the bosses and the NPCs you run into in the Ring City, it beats it out just slightly. Like by a half point. You could even put the old Hunters at like 1.5 if you really wanted to. But that sounds stupid, so we'll keep it at 2. But yeah, the Ring City is indeed my #1 DLC. But if we got to see anything, it is that the best is yet to come, I think, for Elden Ring. The best bosses, the best areas, the best weapons, quite possibly the best NPCs, I still think are yet to come, which is insane to even say that, considering how awesome Elden Ring is, but let him cook, you know? Let's see what Miyazaki's cooking up. Anyways, that's gonna be it for the... Oh wait, one more bonus round. Sekiro, of course.
I am beautiful.